we've seen this with flocks who've done a really, really good performance up to 7 weeks in previous years, and suddenly by the time we get to weaning, their performance looks average at best. And as you said, what happens is it drops off in that 7 to 14 weeks. There's a number of things that usually happen. And first thing that usually happens is we kind of get to that kind of middle of May period. We've given the first dose and we kind of relax a bit. Grass is suddenly bursting out of the ground. We're getting huge growth rates every day on grass, and maybe quality slips a bit. We don't keep our eye on the ball as much of it as we should.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you less insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. We're joined this week's episode by Dr. Frank Campion to give us an update on lamb performance and management on the better farms. We start off discussing lamb growth rate and the bounce back we've seen on farms this year in the months of May and June. We tease out this change in performance, discussing grassland management, parasite challenge and the impact that early weaning has had on some of the farms. We move on to discuss the current state of play on the farms in regards to weaning weights, drafting and the implications that carrying increased numbers into the back end of the year will have for some farms. In the latter part of the episode, we talk about some of the management aspects over the coming weeks, finishing groups, grassland, fertiliser and forage crops, as well as parasite control at this stage of the season. We start off, however, with Frank giving us a recap of performance on these farms this year to date.
Yeah, so the last time we were talking, Kieran, we were probably on a slightly negative mood looking at the lamb performance, and we were heading into what did turn out to be a drought period for a lot of the farms insofar as we were worried about grass growth rates dropping off and how we're going to manage that. So since then, all of the flocks have weaned. So for some of those flocks, it was a case of weaning maybe a week or 2 weeks earlier than they'd planned. The idea being that, grass growth rates were dropping off, and to try and preserve grass for the lambs was to wean, drop the demand for grass on the farm, tighten up the O's. And that has worked quite well. So, that gave us a chance then to look at the weaning weights and see how lambs had actually performed from that kind of 7 week to weaning period.
Look, last time we're chatting, performance in that early period that's really crucial was back about 15 grams a day on the farms. Maybe just set the scene for what has happened lamb performance from that 7 weeks up to weaning and where the farm's sitting at.
Yeah, so I suppose at that stage, Kieran, exactly, we're back about 15 grams a day on average. And I suppose we were, as normally happens, growth rates are dropping off the whole time during that lactation period, particularly after 7 weeks. So the lamb is now pretty much reliant on grazed grass to drive its performance. But when we look at the performance from 7 weeks to 14 weeks, compared to previous years, we're probably about that 15 grams ahead of where we were, particularly where we compared 23 to 22. And what that has meant is that on average, our actual growth rates from birth to 14 weeks have ended up roughly similar across the flocks that we've been measuring on for a number of years when we look at it like that. So I suppose we've seen that while the growth rates have never recovered up to the high rates you see from 0 to 7 weeks, from what we would typically see from 7 to 14 weeks is ahead of what we've seen in other years.
Okay. So like just to put in context, 7 weeks, that's roughly around when we're given our first dose on farms. Our 14 weeks is 3 months our weaning period.
Yeah.
That second phase is usually challenging. Grass gets challenging. You parasites, you have other things coming in, and performance can, even for flocks that did very well early on, drop off a lot at that stage. So it's actually held up very well this year.
It has, yeah, because usually, Kieran, what happens is we've seen this with flocks who've done a really, really good performance up to 7 weeks in previous years, and suddenly by the time we get to weaning, their performance looks average at best. And as you said, what happens is it drops off in that 7 to 14 weeks. There's a number of things that usually happen. And first thing that usually happens is we kind of get to that kind of middle of May period. We've given the first dose and we kind of relax a bit. Grass is suddenly bursting out of the ground. We're getting huge growth rates every day on grass, and maybe quality slips a bit, and we don't keep our eye on the ball as much of it as we should. And at a time when we really have to, because the lamb is now taking most of its nutrient requirements from the grass. And the other thing we typically see is kind of from that 7 to 14 week period is the parasite challenge rises. We typically start to see our strong guile counts or our roundworm counts rise at that stage. And for most flocks, they will have to go in with some sort of an anthelmintic dose between the 7 and the 14 week period. I suppose this year we didn't see that. We saw the dry weather, which did put drought on some farms, maybe didn't put a drought on all farms, but definitely put a check in grass growth rate, meant that our worm counts never actually really rose. So there wasn't a parasite challenge on the lambs, which helped with their performance. And the second thing we saw is that grass growth rates, for only a small period, hit those really high peaks that we tend to see in May and June. And it probably meant that for some of the farms, particularly some of the lower stock farms, quality of grass remained good. So it was much easier to manage the swards ahead of them, and that in turn boosted performance. To come back to that probably a side effect of the early weaning too was probably that grass quality going to the lambs at weaning time was probably that little bit better as well.
Okay, so just let's put this in context. That 7 to 14 week performance, that's been fairly consistent across all those flocks.
Yeah, it's been a consistent rise across those flocks.
Okay. So, right, you touched on two things. So the parasite challenge, that's a fairly obvious one, and it's one of the benefits of that dry weather. The grass one, I suppose the trade-off there is overall production is probably slightly back on the farms this year. But as you said, the trade-off with that was we probably didn't have that huge amount of quantity to balance out the quality on farms.
Yeah, that's exactly it, Kieran. And it's particularly for the slightly lower stock farms. I'm talking about the farms that are kind of maybe 6 to 8 ewes per hectare, where they're growing more than enough grass than what their probably stocking rate needs at the minute. Because what we've seen with flocks over the years is once you get kind of the main steps of a grassland management program in place, you can very quickly boost the amount of grass you're producing. But to maybe get your management and your stocking rate around those things takes a little bit more time. So quality can be an issue in that period, but that wasn't an issue at that stage.
Okay, then just from a management point of view, I suppose there's two aspects of that spring to mind. One, going into drought, did the farmers maybe just push them lambs as hard grazing wise? And secondly, that impact of early weaning on those lambs. Was that a big pro in your eyes in terms of maybe not hitting that lag face?
It's always dangerous to take 1 year in isolation. And we see this when we look over the average all the time. But looking at this year, yes, it was a pro insofar as that you get that lag period. When you look at some of the research done around the world on sheep, like once you get kind of beyond that 8 week, 9 week stage, it's the grass that's driving performance. You find you might see lambs in suckling, but it's not doing that in major performance. So if you can improve your grass quality going into the lambs at that stage at a young age, you will improve your performance. And we didn't get that lag phase that you tend to see in June, where quality can get a bit hard to manage on farms, or I might be slightly off the ball, and we're trying to maybe build up good paddocks for weaning or aftergrass for weaning. But at the same time, in those couple of weeks leading up, maybe the quality that they're getting at that stage isn't what it should be. So it turned out to be a bit of a pro for, a bit of an advantage for some of them flocks that weaned a bit early. And you're right, they didn't push as hard as we might in other years, because I suppose they were moving the lambs, were weaned, they were moving them on quickly, and they were trying to dry up ewes behind them, and they were doing the hard work and the dirty work behind them.
And so, look, there's no free lunch in that. That lax grazing probably has thrown up a few quality issues that needs to be addressed now. And in fact, probably look at the drought and the fact that grass got stressed a bit earlier probably did have an impact on quality if you were pushing tight.
Yeah, it did. And I think looking at the grass data, the growth rates coming in at the minute, yeah, our grass growth rates are back to where we want them to be. But our days ahead are probably ahead of where we want them to be at the minute. So there is a quality issue there now. So what we might have seen earlier some years insofar as struggling to keep our days ahead right, we're now seeing that now. So there's a bit of work to be done in terms of resetting swards, be that with topping to get rid of that kind of really stemmy kind of tronine stuff, but also maybe getting some of them heavy covers out. Now look, I appreciate it's quite wet at the minute. That presents its own challenge, and there's probably also an issue in terms of rotations. They're probably all a lot of fields at the same level. Particularly those farms that were really hit by dry weather insofar as they were grazing everything down. It wasn't growing back. We weren't getting the patchwork quilt as our former better farmer John O'Connell used to talk about. The farm wasn't looking like that. So you're going to get a lot of paddocks coming at the same stage. So in order to reset that rotation and get back going right, there is a bit of work to be done now to keep that lamb growth rate going.
Yeah, and I suppose the other thing is that you're not going to correct all fields at the one time and set everything back either. Like it could change either way very quickly the moment we get a bit of heat. Definitely the moisture is being corrected anyway, so it could just see growth rates boom. And as you said, look, you could have a lot of fields at the same stage.
Yeah, you could, you know what I mean? And like the danger now is we're kind of the middle of July now, right? We won't feel ourselves getting through August, September. And what we want to make sure is that by the time we get to that period, we have enough lambs moved off the farm that we're not under pressure for grass in the autumn. But if we're if we end up with a lot of very heavy paddocks, or we don't get rid of it, maybe top some of them very dirty stemmy paddocks at the minute, and we've poor quality swards the lambs are going into, thrive will drop off. Look, lamb thrive is going to be back at the minute. It's going to be somewhere probably between around 200 grams a day, at this stage, even a little bit less. So if we push that too much, then in terms of grass quality, that's going to fall even more. So now you're getting poor growth rates, on a weekly basis, and you're not going to be moving lambs in the same way that you should.
We'll come back to some of the management aspects in a moment. Let's just go back to the lambs for a second. Talk to me a little bit about actual lamb weights. We talked about the growth rates, but a lot will relate more with actual weights. So where did it sit at weaning? Talk to me a bit about the variation and a little bit about drafting on the farms.
Yeah, so look, if you look at the weaning weights, we went to, there was a big variation in it, going from the mid-20s up to kind of 32, 33 kilos for twin lambs. And go focus on twin lambs because they're the majority of the lambs within the flock, right? So, for those lads that were getting kind of, a couple of flocks there that were at 31, 32, 33 kilos average weight for twins, they're bang on where they want to be, and that's bang on target. So they will have moved lambs on at weaning. They'll have had some of the singles going at that stage, and they're probably starting to move small numbers now over the next few weeks, and it'll be building the whole time. The flocks then that are less than 30 kilos, so we had a couple of flocks there that were coming in kind of between 27 and 28 and a half kilos. They're the ones now who are going to have to really put a watch on it. And what's going to happen there is they would have moved a few lambs at first, so there would have been single lambs, or maybe there was a few lambs in a problem group that were getting creep all along. They'll move them relatively quickly, but they'll hit a lag now because the majority of their lambs are twins. Their average weight was only 28 kilos, we'll say, so they're 3 or 4 kilos behind where they should be. So there's going to be a lag now where they're not moving any lambs. So those flocks have a bit of management, a bit of work to do now to try and keep the drafting pattern up, so that they're not ending up with a big pile of lambs left in the autumn. And for those flocks here, and it's not about going in now with the blanket supplementation or anything like that. There's no, we're not pressing the nuclear button on this. It's about, getting grass quality right in front of everything, and then pulling off the heavier lambs, those kind of 38 kilo plus lambs, and putting them into a finishing group. And we've talked about that on this before, where you target your kind of half a kilo a meal into them, target supplementation, you'll move them about 2 to 3 weeks quicker than they would have normally, and you're bringing your drafting slightly forward.
You're talking there about lambs are kind of within 8 kilos or 8 to 10 kilos at most, I suppose, of finishing.
Yeah, 8 to 10 kilos at most, exactly.
Finishing weight 45, 46 kilos, you're looking at 36 up, basically, yeah?
Basically, yeah. Any lighter than that, and it's not going to be cost effective. Once you get into those heavier weights, it's a shorter supplementation period. It's, half a kilo per day. So what the lads are doing is they're going once a day, trough feeding in the field. They're not filling creep feeders every day, anything like that. And basically, as they move lambs out of the finishing group, they're getting more lambs that are coming into it, because obviously those lighter lambs are growing the whole time, and you're adding lambs into the group then, and you're just keeping it moving like that.
You're just looking for cheap gain on them light ones. Look, I suppose we're in the middle of July at the moment, and it seems a bit early to talk about this, but let's just put this in the context of those farms where the lambs are backward in 27, 28, which means there's lambs either side of that. We're roughly only 2 grazing rotations away from hitting the start of September, so probably they need to start talking with them or thinking about building covers. Am I carrying extra into the autumn period? It's something that's going to have to factor into management and fertiliser applications over the coming weeks.
It definitely is. It definitely is. So a lot of lads wouldn't have went with much or any fertiliser kind of during middle of May to up till a week or two ago, because the weather conditions weren't right. So now everyone's gone with some bit of fertiliser in the last kind of 2 weeks, rightly so, try and get things growing again. But they're going to have to be very careful, like that. There will have to be more fertiliser go out in August. So that August spread is always very important to make sure we build enough cover for the autumn. And some people will try and push that out to the very end of the deadline. Realistically, you should be going with that sometime middle to end of August to get the best value out of it. And then the second thing then is to look at the actual demand on grass. So, go through your lambs, get them heavier ones into a finishing group. For some higher stocked farms, maybe where you had a very poor performance and you have a lot of light lambs, the store issue might have to be looked at. But I suppose the big thing you can do with demand at the minute is get rid of culls, if they're not gone already, and go through your ewes properly, make sure if whatever's being kept is marked and the tin ones are pulled out, and that you're starting to try and build a bit of cover on them now, doing it in plenty of time. And then if they're not responding to it, obviously then as you come into September, you can move them on as well.
And look, we're going to start to see store land markets kicking off too. There is also a need on that farms. Look, there is bills coming in, maybe to offload some. So taking a batch and maybe assessing where you are, it's no harm for any farm at the moment.
No, it's not. And look we go out and we weigh every lamb on the better farms, obviously. But, if someone was to just weigh 15, 20% of their lambs, they'd have a very good idea of where they're sitting. Break it down. How many lambs are less than 25 kilos? How many lambs are 25 to 30? How many are 30, 35? How many are 35 plus? And if you do a simple calculation like that, you'll get a very good idea of where your performance is sitting and what you need to do.
Yeah, that small batch of weighing, you can just train your right, maybe some of them lighter ones. Look, we talked a little bit about finishing groups, about management. Obviously, there's aftergrass, other things coming in that will have an impact on performance. Some of the farms, Frank, the tillage on the farms as well, have they gone with cover crops in for the winter?
Yeah, so I suppose the harvest has begun in the southeast, and it's probably a little bit earlier than some people were thinking. The one advantage to that is with 2 farms in the southeast, they will be able to get cover crops in good and early, and that will be an outlet for lambs. And for one of them flocks, you'll probably be looking at buying store lambs to put onto it, and then for for both flocks, they'll have some of their own lambs to go onto it. I suppose we were probably unlucky insofar as both farms had attempted to put in cover crops in May, so that they would have a cover crop there to wean lambs onto. And I suppose the thinking behind that, Kieran, was that they were used to seeing the drought kind of, from late June into July, and they were always feeling the pinch on grass then. Because it kind of came a bit earlier this year than previous years, those crops failed basically, and they've had to go back in and resow them. So in one case, it's a resowing job. In one case, it never got sown at all because the rain, by the time we were ready to sow it, it was starting to dry up, and we were waiting for this magical rain to come, and it just didn't come until there a couple of weeks ago. So
look, it's an option for farms at the moment. If they have access, that is a potential way of carrying lambs in if you have ones on board backward.
it is, yeah, it is. Like, and look, there's an advantage to both systems in that, like, if you have tillage crops and you can go in with something like a red start or a forage rape now, and you can use it for grazing your lambs in the autumn, like, you're putting organic matter back into your own tillage ground. It's also helping with picking up any nutrients left over in the soil after the tillage crop. So you're adding value to everything.
That's tying both systems together. One we touched on there earlier was the parasite challenge. It did remain low early in the year. I imagine with that bit of rain and that after coming in, that's after increasing a lot. You're monitoring them boardings around the country on the better farms. Are you seeing much variation, much high counts coming back? What's the pattern looking like?
Yeah, big variation, Kieran, I suppose. Like, look, we've had one flock where it rose very quickly, and very quickly had to dose after the rain came. But we've had a number of other flocks where it's only starting to rise probably in the last week or 10 days. And that, I suppose, is a trade-off of the fact that things had got so dry, and by the time the moisture levels got up to anything significant, we're only starting to see that effect now. The danger is with that is, unless you're continuously monitoring, is it can change very, very quickly. So I would expect we'll probably see in the next week or so now that counts will rise rapidly. So it's a good chance, I suppose, for those flocks, and we do a number of flocks, is to test and see what doses are working on farms and what aren't working on. So, and the danger for some flocks too, I suppose, there was an immediate panic when the rain came, all worm counts would shoot up. It didn't happen that quickly for a lot of the flocks. So for some flocks, they might have went in straight away after the first rain and given a dose. There was probably no need for it, and those flocks have to monitor very carefully now that they don't get a very high count all of a sudden.
Plenty to focus on for the coming weeks. So, Frank, it was good getting an update on the better farms. Appreciate you coming on today with us.
No, thanks for having me on, Kieran.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. It was good getting an update from Frank. I think some of them challenges are reflected around the country. Adapting management over the coming weeks will have a big impact on it. Again, highlighting the need to assess where your lambs are on the farm at the moment and putting a plan in place to get them finished is important at this stage of the season. For updates on the Better Farm can be found in the Teagasc Sheep newsletter and on the Better Farm page on the Teagasc website. That's it for me for this episode. For updates on our sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more episodes.